You're wondering which is a more reliable car brand? Is it Mercedes-Benz or is it BMW? I've owned a handful of Mercedes-Benz ranging from 190E all the way back in the 80s. Of course, a 90s generation. I also currently own a late model 2018 Mercedes C300, and I could speak to the overall reliability of Mercedes, where it's come from and where it's going to. BMW, I've owned a dozen BMWs over the course of my lifetime, and I can certainly speak to where BMW has also come from and where they're at today. Which in fact is the most reliable car brand? We're going to get into it now. Mercedes-Benz builds a whole host of very popular vehicles, SUVs, cars. Here we have one of the more popular entry-level models. This one here is the GLB 35, but the GLE or GLA specifically and GLB are effectively on the same platform. This is the bottom barrel for Mercedes-Benz, and they go all the way up to the GLS, which is the range topper, and one of the most popular SUVs on the market segment is the GLE. This specifically is the 450, but you can get a variety of different drivetrains, and this is one of the most popular versions. BMW has a model that lines right up with this, and it's the X5, also one of the most popular in the luxury car segment, and clearly one in which that people are always debating. Do I buy the GLE or the X5? But these seem to be a couple of the more popular SUVs in the luxury car segment today. The GLE, like we're looking at right here, does give you 4MATIC. It does give you all-wheel drive in the 4MATIC because that's essentially what it means. And this has evolved from a series and generations way back many moons ago of what they call the ML series, to which I've owned one many years ago. Now I go back to the old models like a 300E or the 190E many moons ago back in the 80s, and those were built like true workhorses. Everybody knows that Mercedes cabs, a lot of in Europe, were used and renowned for long life with their turbo diesel engines, and diesel engines that they run for millions of miles in Europe. BMW didn't have as many models that could do the same thing. Although BMW was a lot more focused on motorsports, Mercedes-Benz was really renowned for long life and quality motoring many moons ago. Throughout the decades, Mercedes-Benz has had their share of ups and downs. And you think back in the 80s, they've made some of the most legendary drivetrains and some of the best well put together vehicles. But through different CEOs, different priorities, money-making propositions, it has changed the focus from the brand, in my own personal opinion. And what you're seeing is these ups and downs through the different generations. Some great ones, some not such great ones. I think back 1998 was our ML500, that 5-liter V8 twin cam. Of course, it had twin plugs, and it was an absolute workhorse. The engine was great, the transmission was solid, but everything around it was junk. Plastics would fall off, sunroof coming off the rails, regulators were failing, it would rust, and a lot of those were known, of course, for poor quality issues, and a lot of them, of course, were built in the United States, and they have that reputation of poor durability. Now, the engines were good, but the rest of it would just fall apart. So they've had these ups and downs. Then you look at a Mercedes W204 like this. This is the generation just before mine. I have a W205, and we've had some issues. No longer do you get the V6, 3 liters, or any of those displacements. It's now all replaced with 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engines in their lower trim levels. Sure, well, you can step up to a twin turbo 3-liter V6, and now, of course, unfortunately, toggled over to a turbocharged 2-liter with hybrid assist means they're really focused more on the carbs. They're really effectively focused more on efficiency, meeting the EU regulations, and it really begs the question, how much more can they trim off the top? See, some people would argue that the 204 was much better than the current generation, which I own, which is the 205 in the C-Class. And there's a lot to it, but let's take a quick look. I mean, we look at this as more of a conventional grille, and so it's definitely more true to the brand, whereas the new versions have a much more sporty style. They definitely have veered away from a lot of the Mercedes traditional styling. Of course, you get this old traditional mirrors, big sunroofs on top. Here we have the coupe. Of course, you can get this in the sedan, but you'll notice this is a C350 and it's 4MATIC. That's right, there's no turbocharged 2 liters under the hood of this vehicle. Rather, this gives you a naturally aspirated V6 engine. It has a beautifully crafted interior from a time when the parts and the fit and finish look to be actually very, very sturdy. And when you look at the trim on the dash, the steering wheel, in between the seats, everything looks well crafted. Let's skip ahead to this generation. This is essentially the same generation as my W205. This effectively is the GLC, GL being, of course, the SUVs, but the C being sort of that compact size SUV, and effectively carries the same drivetrain, the engine and transmission that my car carries. and the interior is largely the same. Let's give it a look, shall we? If you look at this interior, it's nicely styled, and I've always said I love the detailing of my Mercedes-Benz. But let me just be clear, this is not the same quality as even the W204, which feels a lot more stapled together. You start pulling on buttons, fittings, pull on that middle screen, and you'll find you hear lots of squeaks, creaks, rattles, and cracks. And that just seems to be the growing trend for a lot of these modern Mercedes-Benz. Many people would argue and say, the only real Mercedes is starting at the E-Class and up. And I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that, but unfortunately, a lot of the quality and fit and finish still isn't what it used to be. Now, of course, you get into a modern E-Class and S-Class, they feel a lot more solid. They have air ride suspension, the interior is slightly better put together, and it's more of their trademark brand, so they're going to put a little bit more effort into those vehicles. And as you go down the food pecking order, you move now into a subcompact SUV from the GLC to the GLA, and this one's a 250. And of course, I love this vehicle. They're fun, they're frisky, and they're peppy, but the quality is questionable. And the engine is one that you'll find also in the C-Class and GLC, as well as a GLA. This is a slightly detuned version of a Renault-derived, that's right, a French-derived engine under the hood. This one here, though, is transversely mounted, which in other words is predominantly front-wheel drive and gives you a little extra torque to the rear-wheel drive. So slight different configuration in the drivetrain. As you trim down, a lot of these vehicles, you're going to find the quality not quite the same. Take a look inside of this vehicle and you'll see they have the cute big screen here, lots of chrome detailing, brushed aluminum. A lot of it looks great on the outside, but when you actually start living with it and touching buttons and pulling on parts, you'll find, again, more squeaks and rattles. Now, one thing when you do a lot of research, and my own personal experience, is a lot of the engines these days seem to be afflicted with a lot more issues. Some of these engines, even the W204, and when you talk about the 6.2 liter AMG V8, it's one of the best, rowdiest engines you can possibly find. But they had issues, timing chains, worn cam lobes, timing gear, shuffling heads. They had their share of issues, and just about every modern day Mercedes-Benz seems to be afflicted with some unique Achilles. Mercedes-Benz was known for high levels of quality and long-lasting durability, but things have changed. Now, of course, we get the new generation, this GLB, which is essentially the same as the GLA that we just looked at, but this is a boxier, more utilitarian version, which does give you an optional third row seating. So they do have actually, in fact, one of the most practical subcompact SUVs on the market that gives you third row, and there's not many like this on the market. They do make some compelling vehicles when you consider you can spend as much for one of these base models, a GLA or a GLB 250, as you could for a ramped up RAV4 Toyota, and those don't have nearly the interest in driving experience, they don't have nearly the tech, and they certainly don't have the excitement and appeal and curb appeal that a lot of these modern day Mercedes have, and for very similar money. And from my own personal experience, a GLE, for example, and this one being 4MATIC, does give you just about every amenity you could possibly dream up in a modern day Mercedes-Benz. But what I've personally found is a lot of the fit and finish isn't quite there. It looks great. It's essentially a shell of what Mercedes-Benz used to be. But a lot of people have complained with a lot of the GLEs of having turbo noises. You know, you have problems with lighting and electric systems and fault codes on the dashboard, not just check engine lights, but fault codes for lighting systems, modules, sensors that detect where you are in proximity to other people walking by or driving by. It has great detection systems, a lot of safety technology. The lighting systems are amazing, and a lot of the tech inside is wonderful. But I personally believe that Mercedes-Benz is certainly pushing the idea of better and more interesting ergonomics and technology. The interior of a lot of the modern Mercedes is far more interesting than what you're finding in most BMWs, in my own personal experience and opinion. You get the big screens, you get all kinds of cool detailing, brushed aluminum fit and finish there, gorgeous seating, and you even generally get more glass on top, more of the panoramic design. See, from my personal experience, even cars and SUVs like the Mercedes, the GLE and the E-Class have issues. Air conditioning compressor has been noted issue, all kinds of driver modules for your headlamps and a lot of your safety sensors. There's been problems and complaints about your fold-in mirrors. There's also been problems and complaints about the tailgate not operating properly, certainly, or your backup camera, which can often be found in places like this. there's often been lots of complaints about a lot of the electrical systems, the infotainment system for some reason, as well as some of the seating has been known to peel away, and the laminations of some of the bolsters seem to be peeling away on some of these GLEs. Fuel gauge, fuel pump have been problematic, the alternator and as well the starter have all been sources of some problems, but it's the transmission that's got some highlight on this, where in some cases they fail to actually downshift, which means that it'll continue just slowing down, and it doesn't downshift gears. And there have been situations where the vehicle just stalls because it just keeps slowing down, and the transmission does not shift down or put itself in effectively neutral, and then stalls the vehicle. Numerous problems. Large amount of the issues seem to be more related to the electrics and the sensors and all of the electronics in modern day Mercedes-Benz. The engines have not been all that problematic in a lot of these vehicles, particularly when you step up to the higher trim level vehicles with some of the bigger V6s and the V8s. But it's a lot of the base engines that are designed by Renault, as well as some of the electronics, are some constants that you're going to find in a lot of the modern day Mercedes. Then you get into the smaller, the GLA, GLBs, and you often get dual clutch gearboxes because it's a different configuration. The engines turn sideways, and they team it up with a different transmission altogether. Dual clutch means a lot of customers have complained with very aggressive, rough shifting, not very smooth. Although the transmissions haven't been extremely problematic, in many cases they've actually been more or less as durable as you could ask for. It's the drivability element that isn't that great. And then in vehicles like the GLC 300 or the C300, which is the car, you can get a 4MATIC, which gives you predominantly rear-wheel drive with an upgrade to all-wheel drive in the 4MATIC. These vehicles are fun, and if you look at the classifieds, you'll find a lot of them with 100,000, 120, 140,000 miles. They can last, but again, it's that French designed engine, and it's not that particularly durable. Overall, it's a 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine in this vehicle. It's the same vehicle and drivetrain effectively as the vehicle we have. Now, there have been cases with some of these engines blowing apart. You find out, look on the forums, and you'll hear about some cases of pistons blowing open. Essentially a whole piston because of detonation, poor fueling, whatever. There's been a variety of different reasons for that. So some engine failures in some of these vehicles, and that same thing goes over here because these carry a detuned version of the same engine that you're going to find in the GLC and the C300. But unfortunately, they come with other issues. We've had a whole host of problems with electronics, headlights, sensor detection, faults and codes all over the dashboard lighting up like a Christmas tree. That's been a common issue for us. A lot of the electrical systems have been a big common failure, and it seems to be a common issue for Mercedes-Benz. Of course, here you do get noises up front. We have had noises since day one, and the dealer could not figure out exactly what was going on. But when you're turning a certain way at low speed, slow roll, you're hearing sort of and it's not the tires. There's something going on. The dealer can't find the issue, but there's something happening there. It's a bit fragile on the front end. Remember, there's a transfer case or a front differential for that. As well, body panels. On ours, there's a panel here on the coupe that has popped off and become loose. Unfortunately, even a speaker has popped out of the door panel in our car when we hit a set of train tracks. Clear indication things are a little fragile in modern day Mercedes-Benz. But there's a new issue. We just came across a new check engine light. After doing some scrambling, I plugged in my OBD2 code reader and it spit out a code for the PCV. Yeah, that's crankcase ventilation, positive crankcase ventilation. And now for a regular garden variety vehicle from an old Honda Civic, that'd be nothing. That'd be 10 minutes under the hood and probably a $30 part, and you'd be on your way. But no. This is a Mercedes-Benz. After doing some research, apparently it's about a 6 to 7 hour job for labor. So at $225 an hour, you figure out the math on that. It's going to cost you a good couple grand. The parts itself, we're talking $400 or $500 for the part, the PCV. It's quite labor intensive, and unfortunately it becomes a $3,500 job to do at the dealer. And the worst part is it's a commonly known issue. So if you're looking at a lot of these, that's something you've got to be thinking about, and it's not insignificant because that's just one of a laundry list of potential failures of some of these vehicles. That said, there is allegedly, and we're about to find out very soon, there's a bulletin that came out from Mercedes-Benz. They are extended the warranty to 15 years and about 241,000 kilometers on that part, so you should pretty much be good to go for the rest of the life of the vehicle for that part. But that's one part. The rest of it is a whole host of different potential failures. What I'm finding out with modern day Mercedes-Benz is very complicated, very complex, and they look wonderful from the outside. But the quality, the durability, the reliability is not once what it used to be. Back in the 80s, they were wonderful. and different generations, they've seen some great vehicles. But remember, not all of them are the same. And just because they all carry that 3-pointed star doesn't mean that they're all reliable, good quality, long-lasting vehicles. And again, looking in the classifieds, it's not uncommon to find these vehicles with 120 and 140,000 miles. So many of them can run the distance. But the fact is, it's going to likely keep a significant budget roll or cash roll to keep these on the road. So much of my personal experience is validated by Repair Pal, who states Mercedes-Benz these days is about a 3 out of 5 star for overall reliability. And when you consider the types of failures, well, they're pretty significant at times. But they're also ranked at 27 out of 32 manufacturers for overall reliability. That doesn't rank all that high, and that's kind of in line where I'm feeling. Like, they're great cars, they're fun to drive, they're lovely, and there are certain models that are much better than others. But there are certainly some that are a real problem. They're also on average over $900 per year for servicing costs, and I can attest with the A and B alternating service plans, it usually means you're doing a transmission service or an oil filter or a bunch of air filters, and none of those services come cheap. Last year, I actually did a bunch of the servicing myself because we just ran out of the service plan, and I realized that the dealer quoted us $1,200 to do that service. Well, granted, it was one of a more major service, but still service nonetheless, with only 58,000 kilometers on the clock for our car. It makes us wonder, where does this end? So it's not insignificant for repair costs for any of these modern day Mercedes-Benz. And on top of it, they're saying the likeliness of a major failure is about 0.7 times per year. So in other words, you're about once every 2 years to have a major failure. And of that, 13% to be severe by nature. Could be engine, major fuel system issue. So it's not insignificant. And while they are fun to drive, you've just got to know what you're getting into when you're buying a modern day Mercedes-Benz. If I was going to buy a brand new Mercedes-Benz and do this all over again, I would probably get myself the derivative of this vehicle. I'd probably get the GLC 43 or the C43 AMG, because that gives you the M276 engine. There have been some issues there, but for the most part, those engines, especially later models, seem to be a lot better. Earlier generations, they had some timing chain issues, they had some fueling problems, but the later models seem to be a lot better, and the modern day M276 twin turbo 3-liter V6 is a hot rod. It's fun, and it can also be mated up to the all-wheel drive 4MATIC system. Means it's practical, it's relatively reliable for a modern day Mercedes-Benz, and it's fun, and they also look great because in the 43 series or AMG version of those, they look wonderful. So that would be my recommendation for a reasonable amount of reliability and certainly a fun vehicle to drive in the luxury car segment. So where does BMW rank in terms of overall reliability when compared over to Mercedes-Benz? Well, BMW is a little bit different. When you look at the types of failures, the severity of failures, it's a much higher bandwidth. And the reason I say that, Mercedes-Benz, it's an overall lower level of reliability in my personal experience. The quality of the fit and finish is not amazing. It looks great, the ergonomics are wonderful, but the quality just feels a little fragile. And of course, overall, we said 27 out of 32 in terms of overall ranking, and just over $900 per year for servicing. Where does BMW rank? The worst of BMW is worse than the worst of Mercedes, but the best of BMW is better than the best of Mercedes. So you're getting these much higher frequencies. And a lot of that has to do with the types of drivetrains that BMW's been putting in their vehicles lately. Right here we have a modern day X3. This would be comparable to what we were just looking at, the Mercedes-Benz and the GLC. This is essentially the same vehicle. Now these are also nicely styled. Look, you have the beautiful alloy wheels on here. Also great little detailing, fold-away mirrors. You do get a panoramic glass on this vehicle, but a lot of the BMWs only give you the smaller glass. If you're buying a sedan like the 3 Series or the 5 Series sedans, you're going to find the upper glass smaller in the BMWs. You're also going to find a lot less pizzazz, a lot less flair. Handles are a little simpler. Of course, this is a nice two-tone piece, but you're going to find the overall design consistent with the brand, and the design language is definitely BMW, but it's not really all that flashy. This is kind of a conventional look with the butterfly deal, of course, as well as the angel eyes. It looks very conventional. Now, this isn't the latest X3. The latest X3 is fugly. But looking at this previous generation, which is a fairly late model vehicle, This one here is a 2018 X3 xDrive 30i. So that means it comes with the B48 engine. Now the B48 engine is one of BMW's very, very best these days. It's a modular 4-cylinder 2-liter engine that racks out about 250 horsepower, and they're absolutely glorious. They're great on fuel, and they're even a little bit punchier than the Mercedes in its same class. You do get LEDs back here, which is nice. xDrive, that's their version of all-wheel drive, and the 30i means you're driving a B48. Again, that 2-liter 4-banger that's turbocharged, and it happens to be direct injected. These are some of the most reliable engines in the luxury car segment today, and BMW happens to drive them. But they've made some major changes from some of their older engines, which, like the N20, were one of their biggest disasters. If you're liking the video so far, you're gonna love the rest of the channel. Be sure to hit that subscribe button down below, and don't forget the notifications bell so you know when the next amazing videos come. Now, BMW differs a little bit than Mercedes. So let's talk about Repair Pal's perspective, and I'll tell you what I think, because I agree with some of it, but not entirely in all of it. The average service cost for BMW is about $968. Putting it about $50 more, roughly, give or take, than the equal amount of Mercedes-Benz dollars. What they're ranking in Repair Pal is 30 out of 32 for overall brands, meaning it's further behind than Mercedes, which was 27 out of 32 for overall reliability. On top of it, 0.9 times per year for a major failure, and about a 15% being catastrophic by nature. That's a pretty significant number when you think about it, relative to Mercedes at 13% and 0.7 times per year. Means that almost every year you could anticipate something significant going wrong with these vehicles. Now there's a bit of a caveat, and that's Repair Pal's perspective, which is an accumulation and a collection of mechanics across the nation. But there's something to talk about there. See, while BMW has some of the most reliable vehicles, you have the ZF 8-speed automatic transmission, one of the most durable, well-driving automatic transmissions, longest lasting transmissions you can imagine in the industry, and many manufacturers from Jaguar to a lot of brands across the nation, includes Alfa Romeo. A lot of the European brands are using them, but they're durable and they drive well. So that's really not a shortcoming for most BMWs. It also has that B48, which is a modular engine, very durable. Of course, modular, they have heat encapsulation, they have better fuel injection system than the outgoing, and they certainly don't have the timing chain piling up like they had on the older engines. So it's an overall really strong workhorse, reliable, great on fuel, and with that engine and that transmission, they're truly matched up very nicely. They are very reliable. But things change when you get into the lower level of BMWs, like the BMW X1, like we have parked right in front of us. Now, the X1 and the X2 are on predominantly a front-wheel drive platform, just like Mercedes and the GLA and GLB. This will have the X1 and the X2. This one being, of course, the X2, which is more sleek, and the X1 being more of an upright SUV. This actually gives you a different transmission. This gives you the ACEN transmission, which is also relatively reliable, as well as another derivative. In certain models, you can get a B38, which is a 1.5, or predominantly the B48 turbo 4-cylinder engine in a lot of these cars. Now, these are wonderful, and I personally love this style. The X2 is one of my favorites. Yes, it's front-wheel drive, all-wheel drive, but I like the style of this. Now, it's not their most expensive, and it's certainly not their fastest, but for a commuter that looks kind of cute, is fun to drive, and has all of the amenities, this is it. And when you think about BMWs of the 80s, the 90s, there's way more of those still laying around, aren't there? You know, the E30, E36, the E46, and of course the E90s. There's still a few of those floating around too. You don't see a lot of the older Mercedes. They just don't seem to be holding up as well as a lot of the modern day BMWs. My own personal experience from BMW, they have much better rust prevention. I mean, you look at a lot of the older Mercedes, the newer ones, a lot of them have a lot of aluminum and plastic and composites, so they're hold up okay. But some of the older ones go a few years back and they just seem to rust. Whereas most BMWs just simply do not rust. They have a better metallurgy designs, and a lot of these cars that you would traditionally find that would rust down in areas like this, or rust in around the rear fender wells, or rust around the fuel caps. A lot of cars, and especially Mercedes-Benz, seem to rust in these areas, these critical spots. BMW just simply don't. And it's not until you see cars with 250, 300,000 kilometers that are 20, 30 years old that you start to see some bubbles erupt. Most BMWs just seem to resist rust. I'm not being a fanboy, because trust me, I own both. I've owned both. And Mercedes-Benz, while they look cute, and they certainly have some things going for them, like some of their older 6.2s and some of their great V8 engines, things have been changing, and BMW has stayed much true to their mantra, and that's essentially the ultimate driving machine. a lot of their cars, even their lower trim level vehicles, are better to drive than the equivalent Mercedes-Benz. Now they're both fun, and you can't really go too wrong with a Mercedes GLC or a BMW like this and an X3 or an X2 like we're looking at right here. They're both going to be fun to drive, and they're both going to offer gobs of experience, fun driving, and performance beyond what you need on the street. But ultimately, the GLC or C300 with the 2-liter has had its share of issues, whereas a lot of these B48s and the 2-liter that you find in BMW really haven't had those types of issues. The only issues you're having now in a lot of these modern day BMWs, oil filter housing problems in some of their straight 6s and their B58. They have this oil filter housing that's mounted in this corner that has a set of gaskets between the cooler and the engine, and they can mix and they can leak with some age. But other than that, the modern day B48 and B58 engines are quite stout. But when you look at Repair Pal and many of the other critics, there is a differencing of opinions, and in my own opinion, BMW generally is a better built vehicle with higher levels of reliability than Mercedes-Benz. But remember, there's a difference. When I said there's that high and low, there's a difference and uniqueness to these brands that make them what they are. But for BMW, this has been some of the struggles. Anything that BMW's been putting out with engines that are V8. Now here we have the M850i. This comes with the N63. And granted, this is the upgrade. The TU upgrades, of course, get you the latest and the greatest. And the problem was the earlier generation of V8 N63s meant that they were a twin turbo with a hot V. So 2 turbos packaged in the V of the engine meant that extra heat in the engine without the proper shielding meant a lot of plastic parts were melting, gaskets were letting go, valve guide seals would start to melt, and it would consume oil like it was going out of style. That's the problem. A lot of the V8 engines had problems. Then there was one upgrade, another upgrade. And finally, they're at a place where they're much better today, but it's still an extremely complex and very expensive engine to maintain and operate. So while they're blisteringly fast, and even better if you get what they call the S63, which is the twin turbo V8, of course 4.4 liters in the BMW M5. Absolutely breathtaking performance. But those twin turbo V8s are the nemesis for the brand. While it's the pinnacle and the best for performance, if you can afford to maintain them, that's awesome, because there are some of the best driving experiences you're gonna find anywhere in a luxury segment. But that's the problem. They also have a high probability of failure and at a very expensive rate. So when you're talking about the average cost per year and the average failure rates being higher for BMW, it's largely because a lot of their V8 engines. Now these latest ones are a lot better. Of course, here's a nice little M850, and I know I had a great viewer that reached out there and said, hey, you want to treat yourself into retirement? Hey, shout out, definitely. It could be a wonderful car. Are you good at DIY? Can you get the CPO, maybe add a little extra warranty? Maybe you don't put a lot of miles on your car. This could absolutely be an amazing vehicle. Just know that there comes some costs in keeping these vehicles in the garage. They're not a cheap car to run, none of them with the V8s, but there's a price for fun, right? You got to pay to play. Unfortunately, some of the older 4.8s were also a bigger problem with some of the crossover coolant piping. You had to take apart the entire manifold just to get at it. So it was a very costly vehicle to maintain and operate. So any of these are going to be pricey, but this is what happens to reliability with BMW. They get the really highs and the really lows. So which BMW would I own? I would personally own, for maximum reliability, get yourself a 340, 440, maybe an M3 with the S58, because that's one of the hottest, most furious engines right now. And even the X3M is one of my favorites. Now, they're hard to get your hands on. They're a lot of fun. Maybe even consider a 240. They're a lot of fun. So anything with the B58 or the S58 engine, or even maybe you don't have the funds and you just want to drive something a little more economical, even the B48 with the Turbo 4 is also fun. It's based on the same platform of that modular engine. It's just 2 less cylinders. They're all great. And honestly, if you were to ask me which is more reliable, BMW or Mercedes-Benz, very close, depends on which model you buy. Overall, I lean to BMW having a slightly higher level of quality.